Hi everyone. In this video we're going to talk about setting up two Raspberry Pis to communicate in a client and server architecture so that we can send messages or data from the client to the server. And I am doing this on my laptop, but I'm connected remotely to two Raspberry Pis and I have terminal windows open. The one on the left, which we're going to call our client, that is a Raspberry Pi called Grow, because I actually use this as a greenhouse controller. That's not important right now, but the second one over here is just called Raspberry Pi, and we're going to use that as a server. Now before we get into writing or running any code, the first thing that we want to do is that we figure out the IP addresses of both these two Raspberry Pis, and that we make sure that they can talk to each other on the same network. So on both of these I'm going to enter an ifconfig command like this, and I'm just going to look and see what the IP address is for both of this. And on the one on the left we can see that we're at 192.168.0.105, and the one on the right we're going to see is 192.168.0.110. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is from each of them we are going to enter the ping command, and we're going to type in the address of the other Raspberry Pi right here, so that we know that we're on the same network and we can send network traffic back and forth. And if we do that over on the one on the left, we can see we're sending a series of messages, a series of packets, and that they're taking not very long at all, just a few milliseconds to get there. And I'm going to hit Control-C to quit right there. And then I'm going to go over on the right, and I'm going to do the same thing with the other address. Notice I'm not putting in the address of my own Raspberry Pi, I'm putting in the address of the opposite one that I want to talk to. And there we go, and we can see that that one's connecting as well. Okay, so what that means, and let's clear the screen on both of these, what that means is they're both on the same network. They can send messages over TCP back and forth to each other. Now we need to be able to send those messages using our own custom Python code. And to do that, we're going to use a couple different Python scripts here. Let's take a look at the server side first. I want to be on the server side over here. I'm going to go over to the right, and what I'm going to do is I am going to call this, I call this very simply server.py, and here's what my server py code looks like. And I will post this code up on the links in the description for this video right here. And what this is doing is several different things. We are getting some imports taken care of and doing some setup. Then we are listening for a connection from our client, and once we get that connection we will give it a variable named C, and we'll let the user know that we have a connection. And then notice that we have an infinite loop right here, a while true loop that waits to receive data, and if it comes in, then we'll decode it and we'll print it out on the screen. Now if you're looking carefully, you might wonder about this line, if no data break. That will exit out of our while true loop when no data occurs. And so you might wonder, well, what if a client isn't connected? Is it just going to stop? And no, actually that's when it receives a null line from the client right there. And we won't get into the details of that, but basically if the client quits, then our server is going to disconnect and exit as well. So we can run this on our server over here. And so I'll get out of that program right there, and I'll run that by typing Python 3 and then server.py. And the server is started and it's waiting for a connection. Now let's go over to the client side over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a client Python script. We can take a look, and this one's even shorter. We've got a couple setup things in here, and so we import, we get our settings correct, we try to connect to the host, and then we've got an infinite loop here, and in this one just is going to ask me to type in something, and then it's going to send it to the server over here. And so let's do that, and we'll run this by typing Python 3 and then client.py, and we can see on both sides what's happening. So on this side, on the server side, it let us know that we have a connection from 192.168.0.105, and on the client side we can see that we are connected to 110. And on the client side I can type whatever I want and hit enter, and the server is going to let me know that it received that information. I can send text, I can send numbers over here, I can send really anything that I want. I can send blank lines. But then once I exit the client with Control C, what you'll notice is that the server is going to notice that it's been disconnected and it's going to exit. Okay, let's talk about a couple details in there, and then we'll talk about how to combine this with sending some data from a program that, say, reads GPIO. First of all, on the client side, notice that in the configuration, I'm putting in the IP address of the host. In this case, I know it's 110, and so I'm going to put that in here. And I'm also going to choose a port. Now, there are lots of ports on a TCP connection. They go up to about 65,000. And generally, if you pick a number in the thousands, you'll probably be okay. In a very unlikely situation, you might use a port that another service on your computer is running. But, you know, we're just going to pick 5,000 and we'll probably be all right. Over on the other side, on the server side, notice that for host, we are not putting anything in at all. We are using a set of blank quotation marks right there. And what we're saying is, you know what, for this host right here, listen on any particular IP connection that you happen to have, and then that'll take care of that. We don't want to use 105 because this is the host, this is the receiving IP address, and we'll just say just whenever you happen to receive anything at all, no matter what IP address it's on, but we do need to make sure that we're on the same port. And then we are going to take care of that from here. Okay, now at this point you might be wondering, well, I have a program that reads the GPIO and does something with it, and I have another program that you just showed me that sends a client message over to a server. How in the world am I going to turn these into one program that runs at the same time? So let's take a little bit of time to look at that. Now, the first thing I'd like you to notice is that both of these programs really have about 3 separate sections. The first one is that we have an import section where we're going to bring in some modules that we need to be able to run our program. And then the second part is we have a setup section. And then the third part is we have a continuous loop that runs basically until we tell the program to quit. So here it is in our GPIO program, and you should be able to look at your client communication program and see the same thing. We've got an import section, we've got a setup section that we need to connect, and then we're going to continuously loop and we're going to send messages over to the server. So if we can merge those 3 sections independently, what we're going to get is we're going to get one program out of 2. So apologies for the weird screen right there, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring in these 2 programs right here, and I've color-coded them, and let's see if we can merge these 2 together. On the left-hand side, what we have is we have our GPIO program right here, and I've color-coded those 3 sections, the import, and then the setup stuff that we need to do in the beginning of our program, and then the continuous loop. And then here's our client communication program over here, the import, the setup code, and then the stuff that's going to loop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some room inside this program right here. So over here on the left, I'm going to put in some lines. I'm going to do this. I'm going to put some in right here. And I'm going to go over, I'm going to do the same thing on the right. And you'll see why I'm doing that here in just a second. Because really what we're trying to do is we're trying to merge these 2 together, right? So I'm going to take this code right here, and I'm going to simply drop it over right here like this. And it's a little messy at the moment, but I think you can see what I'm talking about. So if we put those orange code lines together, and if we put our green setup lines together, something like this, and then finally, we're going to need to combine our 2 while true loops. We don't need 2 loops, we need 1. And so what we're going to do is after we get all of our setup stuff taken care of, we're going to take out these words while true right here, and we are going to take these 2 lines right here and put them into our while true loop. Now, before we do that, and let's put the sleep at the end. Let's put the sleep at the very end of our while true loop. So we're going to take this stuff right here and we'll move it up, but I'll have to leave that for later. Before we do that though, let's think about what our message needs to be. Now, our message in this case is not going to come from the keyboard. It might be what the value of that pin is. So let's do a little bit of magic rearranging on this code right here, and you'll see how we can take this and we can make the message either the pin is high or the pin is low. So I took a moment to clean that code up just a little bit here, and let's edit this while true loop down here. First of all, I said let's take sleep and we'll put it at the end right here. So we'll cut that out. We'll put it at the very end of our while true loop. So the last thing we do before we loop around is to sleep. Now, just before I do that, I am going to do this. I'm going to take S and I'm going to tell it to send a message from one place to another right there. But the message is not going to come from the input. Instead, I'm going to take that line out right here, and I'm going to decide what the message is inside this F and inside this else statement right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, oh, okay, if the GPIO input pin is true, I'm going to print to the screen that it is high. And I'm going to decide that the message that I want to send to the server, message equals HIGH, like that. And then down here in else, otherwise, if that pin is low, I'm going to send a different message. That message is low, right there like this. And so what you should see is my loop here, I'm making a decision. I'm going to read the pin. Should the message say high? Should the message say low? And then either way, I'm going to send that message to the server right here. I'm going to wait 1 second, and I'm going to read that pin over again. So you can see I've merged these two programs together. And in this case right here, we're going to read that GPIO pin, and we're going to send that message to the server. So finally, let's take a look at what happens then when we put that program over onto our client. So over on the client, I called that program GPIO underscore client.py, and then we're going to run the exact same server over on the server side, server.py. So let's get that server started over here. It's waiting for a connection. So if we go back over here and we run the GPIO client, we can see that we're connected. It's letting us know over and over again that that input is low. I don't actually have anything connected to that input right now, but we can see that the server is receiving that message that we have over there. We could have sent anything we wanted, but this shows how we combine those two programs into one. And then finally, when I exit the client, I exit from the server as well. So you can take this and customize this to send any sort of messages that you want over to your server.